I'm Phil Strain with the National Center on Pyramid Model Innovations, and I'm here again today with part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Rosemarie Allen, also of the National Center on Pyramid Model Innovations, around conversations that adults have had, will have, or currently having with young children around and equity. Rosemarie, thank you once again for giving us your time. In part 1, we talked mostly about conversations that parents would have with their young children. And in part 2, I'd like us to spend a little bit more dedicated time talking about the conversations that would occur within early care and education environments. I'm doing good today. Rosemarie, how are you doing?
I'm doing good today. I'm feeling very hopeful and very encouraged.
Oh, that's great to hear. So am I. It's not every day that I feel that way, but this is, this is one of them. So, so let's begin. And my first question to you is anticipating children who are in early care and education settings right now, and considerably more children who will be in these settings in the fall. What kind of preparation should professionals be engaged in right now such that they feel comfortable and confident in having these kinds of conversations with children in their care?
Phil, that's such a great question, because we know that children are very, very, very aware of race. We know that they actually have no trouble talking about differences until an adult intervenes and makes it taboo. But with everything going on in society today, we can count on race coming up. So when you say, how can teachers prepare today for the fall, I think it's critical that they do. There are several things that need to take place before. And the first thing is, again, developing this comfort level talking about race. And you can start with that right now. I talked to a friend the other day, and he said, it was just taboo in my family. We were taught not to see race, just to see people. Talking about race is very uncomfortable for me. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. I don't want to offend. How do I get past it? And the way you get past it is to talk about it. Is to talk about race, to notice race. If you're with your children or grandchildren and you see a little Black girl with curly hair, you can say, oh, her skin is about the color of caramel, don't you think? And look at those curls, almost like yours, but a little different. What do you see as the difference? And just casually noticing differences. And then you also want to be able to answer some of the tough questions. I have a book back here called Teaching for Black Lives. Excellent book. And it gives you the history of some of the issues that are facing Black people today. And then you can casually begin to read books like Mama, Did You Hear the News? And it's talking about being bullied around race. And then this book by Grace Byers, Am I Enough? And there's another book, Let's Talk About Race. And Dr. Iyuma, she wrote a book with her colleagues called Don't Look Away. Amazing strategies for talking about race in the classroom. So I think it's a great idea to begin to prepare for that. And then later on, we could talk about strategies to use in the classroom when racial issues come up.
Yeah, and you know, this reminds me a little bit of something that we touched on in part 1, which is the hurtfulness, if you will, that comes from people saying, well, I don't see race. And you're emphasizing once again for professionals that it's important to recognize that children perceive race, and their role is to help them interpret that in a non-deficit, in a
Mhm.
non-discriminatory, if you will, kind of way. Um, I was thinking today about certain elements of the pyramid model,
Mhm.
actually that don't get traditionally, at least, couched in reference to conversations around race or necessarily even equity. But I thought about the solution kit.
Mhm.
Thought about the evaluation of solutions, which always has as a key component, is it fair?
Yes.
And it seems to me, maybe I'm oversimplifying things, but it seems like fairness is a core principle around talking about race. I mean, am I totally oversimplifying this, or is there some merit to that?
There's actually, you are right on point. We overthink this thing about race. We think we have to have all the answers, all the right words. We think more deeply about the value that's placed on skin color, and children understand fairness. And when you talk to them about being treated fairly or unfairly, if you see someone being treated unfairly, the feelings that come up when you're treated unfairly, that's something they can understand. We don't have to go into all the dynamics of what happens in society, especially with 3 and 4-year-olds, but you are right on target when you say if we talk to children about the sense of fairness and right and wrong and helping people who are in trouble. And those are all critical features of the pyramid model at that very first tier. When we talk about developing amazing, wonderful, strong relationships, we're not only talking about between adults and children, but between children and children and children and families as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you for that. Um, you and I were on a phone call with the NCPMI staff a little over a week ago, and without divulging any personal information, one of our colleagues brought up something that she was discussing with her children, which I thought was really profound. And these were with preteens and teenagers.
Mhm.
And it was that she wanted them to be engaging in behaviors around being advocates, if you will, when they
Mhm.
saw something that wasn't right,
Mhm.
when they saw discrimination, when they saw hurtful behavior, um, being it bullying or perhaps something even directly related to kids' skin color differences and they're being discriminated against. And I got to thinking, I think I've seen that with preschoolers too. I mean, it's
Mhm.
not perhaps as obvious, but it seems like there's a role there in terms of the kind of dispositions that professionals can promote in children.
Absolutely. You remember, Phil, when we were in school, there was this thing about being a good citizen. And there were even good citizenship awards. Part of being a good citizen was to be able to help out your friends. Part of being a good friend in the pyramid model is intervening and advocating. So when you see wrong being done, a good friend comes in and helps out. A good friend comes in and reminds other children of the rules. A good friend comes in and talks about solutions. So at the preschool level, I think it's very important because once we do that at the preschool level, we don't have to worry about it at the high school level because then it's just really, really natural. And research tells us that white children are less likely to intervene when the victim is Black. So even right now, and that's at about, I believe it's between 4 and 6. So right now we can start helping children to advocate for all friends and that we don't make that distinction because of skin color. So again, you're right on point with that. Our colleague was just amazing, what happens so much in terms of allyship and accomplices is there are times we can't stand up for ourselves, and we need people to come and intervene and to help us through these difficult conversations and difficult actions and issues.
Yeah. So one of the things that's been, what's the right word, highlighted, if you will, in the professional literature recently, as well as in the media, is anti-racist
Yes.
curricula. Can you break that down for us in terms of the core components, what that might look like at an early childhood level?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad we're talking about anti-racism. For so long, we've been stuck on implicit bias. And knowing that a lot of people respond in a biased way or just have biased tendencies without knowing that. And all of us are subjected to that. All of us have been impacted by bias in ways that we don't know. But we have to also now be more explicit and talk about racism and what that looks like. So when we think about being anti-racist, the assumption is that you're either racist or you're anti-racist. And that's really hard for some people to think about, because the first thing that comes up is, I'm not a racist. But this theory, especially the way that the author Ibram X. Kendi talks about, he says that not a racist is not a thing because racism exists. So because it exists, you're either against it or you're for it. And you're for it either actively or passively. So an anti-racist is one who fights against racism, policies, practices, ideas, and behaviors at all times. And if you're not actively fighting against racism, then you by default become a passive racist, because now you're just allowing it to exist. So wherever you are, at whatever level you're standing, you have the opportunity to be an anti-racist. And it's really important to understand that a racist isn't who you are. It's what you do or don't do. Because policies, as we know, are racist. Practices are racist. Behaviors are racist. Actions and ideas are racist. So for instance, you're in an early childhood classroom, and we know that children notice race very early. They don't begin to put a value on it until after 3. But they categorize people the same way they categorize shapes and colors. This person has brown skin, this person has darker skin, this person has white skin. But what's really amazing, the value that's placed on skin color can happen in our classrooms. Children notice who's favored, who's not, who gets in trouble, who doesn't for the same behaviors, whose names are called, and so they learn very early who the teacher likes. And that's where we can practice being anti-racist. So we have to make sure that our actions are not racist, that implicit bias isn't shaping the way that we view children. So that's the first step, is to notice how we're influencing these children's ideas about racism, but also to notice what happens in our classrooms. So if you're in a diverse classroom and you have a white child who is always the play initiator, always the one who's giving out the roles, always the one who's telling other children what to do, then you're actually promoting racism, because it uplifts that child in this superior role over other children of color. And that's where you have to intervene. When you hear children talk about skin color, where one is preferred over the other, that's another opportunity to practice your anti-racist skills, is to talk about that. When you talk about your hair looks funny, or you talk funny because you have an accent or you speak a different language, those are opportunities, like we said, to fight against those policies, practices, beliefs, behavior, and ideas. That's your chance to be an anti-racist in your classroom.
Those are wonderful suggestions, Rosemarie. Thank you for those. Can I bring up an issue that we've heard from several people around the country in different parts of the of the country. And here's the guidance that they're looking for. They know that children are going to bring these issues up, talk about them as well. They individually, they personally have a commitment to engaging in exactly the kind of anti-racist actions and being models for children of that kind of set of dispositions and behaviors. But they feel as if they work in an environment that might be hostile to that kind of actions on their part. Would you care to venture into that thorny area? It's one of those things where I feel like we haven't heard from a lot of people. I feel like it's sort of the tip of an iceberg, and there's more of that hesitancy than less of it. People have some fear of retribution, negative reactions to that kind of activity in a classroom from perhaps parents of children. So I'd love to hear your ideas about that.
Thank you, Phil. And there's so much fear out there. And what we have to understand is whose side we're on. When I ran childcare facilities, I always told my faculty, my students, and my families that I was always on the child side. And I used to say, I don't pick sides. I absolutely pick sides. And I'm always going to be on what's good, right, and best for children. That's the first thing. And when you put that in front of you, then things change. Because when you know you're doing what's good, right, and best for all children, that includes being anti-racist. That includes having books and materials and paintings and drawings of all children who live in our world. And if anyone has an issue with that, then that's against children. And you have to explain that. But you know what we have to have as this arsenal, this treasure chest of responses, because so many people fear speaking about race the same way they feared multiculturalism. And to be honest with you, Phil, we made a really big mistake when we started talking about multicultural education, because the way that we defined it and the way that we implemented it included everything that wasn't white. So white people felt left out of that multiracial, multicultural conversation. So they felt that they were being left behind. But as we begin to talk about race in our classrooms, even though I'm not a supporter of all lives, because right now Black lives are centered, but in our classroom, when you begin to include other lives, other people, and someone has a problem with that, then we can very, very lovingly ask, what's coming up for you? Where do you not see yourself? What do you think is going to happen when your child learns about other cultures? Do you think this is that your culture is going to be lost? And really try to help parents to understand it's both and not either or. But again, I would suggest that you have this treasure chest of responses, because I'll tell you, when these things come up in the moment, if you don't already have an idea of what you're going to say, you will be neutralized. So it's the same argument, Phil, with children with special needs. Why do my children have to be held back in the class with this kid? He needs to be in his own classroom. We heard that a lot. So that same treasure chest of responses that we built for that, we also have to build for this. And practice. And think of scenarios. What do you say when a family comes in and says, I moved to this area so I could get away from people like that? What do you say? What do you say when children are speaking Spanish in the classroom and someone comes in and says, this is America, and you need to stop them from speaking that language? You have to know what you will say, because we're going to hear things and people are going to push us, but we have to stand on the side of children and do what's best for them.
Well, I love that standing on this side of children. That clarifies,
Mhm.
does it not? Um, so, you know what? One thing that you just mentioned in your response there touched on something that we got into really briefly. We didn't have a chance to explore it in part one, but I wonder if this is a good time to explore it a little bit more, given this potential issue around hesitancy to stand up for children, to stand up for anti-racist behavior on our part. You mentioned the trauma, not just that African-American folks experienced over generations, but also the trauma that white folks did too.
Mhm.
Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because I don't think we got into that enough to really give folks a keen handle on what the issues are and how to, if you will, correct that in your own life right now.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up, because so many times when we think about historical trauma, we think about the victims. We think about the descendants of slaves, the survivors of the Holocaust, the survivors of the Mexican-American War and all of their descendants. It's definitely the survivors of just the genocide of indigenous peoples. But we rarely think about the perpetrators of that and the trauma that's carried there. So many people say, why are we talking about slavery? I've never owned a slave. And it's like, well, I've never been one, but it still impacts me as well. And the ways that it impacts me is that unhealed trauma for generations. And the way it impacts white people is that they also have unhealed trauma. And the legacy from that, the legacy of owning people, the legacy of seeing people as property, and the legacy of white supremacy that says, I am better than everybody. And this expectation that the world must cater to me. And it doesn't help, especially in education, when many children don't have Black or brown teachers until college. So look at what happens there. For generations, you've had this legacy of owning people as property, of the entire world catering to you, of very, very little tolerance for others and other ways of being. And then you never have a teacher who reflects any of that. And the only time you see Black and brown people, just imagine, Phil, the only time many white children see Black and brown people at school are in roles that serve them. I'm your cafeteria worker, I'm your bus driver, I'm at the front office, I am cleaning up after you. So it does nothing to help white children see Black people, brown people in positions of authority. So that legacy continues to exist. You only serve me. That's your role. So by the time they're coming in contact with Black people in a position of authority, they've had absolutely no experience with it. So that hierarchy, that white supremacy and this oppression is still existing, that are both legacies from slavery. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for expounding on that a little bit today. We are about out of time.
Oh.
And I'm wondering if there's a parting message that you would like to give to early care and education providers about the importance of these conversations for children's development, not just when they're 3, 4, and 5, but when they're 23 and 33 and 73.
Absolutely. And what we say in our early childhood classrooms today, and the way that we prepare our children, all children, to live in a racialized society today will shape those conversations that will take place in 20 years in 30 years, in 40 years. And the most important thing that we could give to our children, it's social emotional learning. How can we talk about social emotional development without helping children understand and realize that fairness is a must? That there's no race of people who are above or below anyone, that we're all different, but we're all equal. And the earlier we teach that message, the more long lasting effect that message will have.
Well, Dr. Allen, you are an inspiration.
Thank you, Dr.
Uh,
Phil.
and as a friend of mine said recently in a text, now there is a national treasure. He was speaking about you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That touched my heart.
For having this time together. And who knows, we just might get the band back together at some point in time in the future.
I hope so. I do. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah.
Dr. Phil Drain, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Allen.
All righty. Take care now.